I wanted to talk to you because your story was quite, it was extraordinary for me to hear about a 15-year survival of GBM. That was extraordinary in itself, but the fact that you have also not had a recurrence in that time really piqued my interest, and it made me think just about what you may have done to achieve that. I know it's been a long time, 15 years. If you could just give us a summary of your experiences with this unforgiving disease and how that's impacted on you over the years as well.
Sure. So I'll kind of give you the unadulterated, complete real story from soup to nuts, from up to current, and kind of give you everything from mindset to sort of clinical things I did. And hopefully that can give context to who I am as a person, which I also think has somewhat played a role in some of my outcomes. And certainly the clinical side, of course, does. And really, as you'll hear, part of my story is just dumb luck. And so all these things kind of play into the tapestry of the whole context. So basically, so it was 05, and prior to 05, again, as greater context, I had lived this very sort of metaphorical perfect life and had done well in school and went to the college of my choice and did well at both Rice University. I swam for them. I was a college swimmer. And I subsequently went to Georgia Tech and ended up getting a degree in industrial engineering and went right into the financial advisory industry right out of undergrad, which was also very rare at that time. And again, very successful very early on in my career. And so everything, again, it's back to this sort of metaphor of overachievement and metaphor of perfection. And, got married and didn't have a problem getting pregnant and blah, blah, blah. Everything that you would think of as, again, being perfect. And right after having my son, and I had my son on April 14th, 2005, I started getting headaches, and I started getting really bad headaches. And I'm never one to get headaches anyway. So it really kind of took me for a loop. And, I went to 3 separate doctors insisting that something was up. And they were like, well, it's postpartum headaches. And, it's really nothing. And go see a neurologist. Well, at least here in Atlanta, in the United States, to see a neurologist as a new patient, there was a 90-day wait. And, that was kind of ridiculous. And the headaches started getting worse. And I think I don't know, maybe they just thought I was another woman with migraines. But I'm not one to sort of complain a lot, I guess, if you will. And finally, they got so bad one morning that I called my internist PA, who happened to be on call, and he says, well, the fastest way to the CAT scan is through the ER. So I went to my suburban community's hospital, to the ER. I get admitted, not even admitted, I'm in the ER, and the guy comes in, he plugs me into some painkillers because these headaches were pretty flippin' bad. And he says, I'm so sorry, you have a 7-centimeter anomaly in your brain. We've paged the neurosurgeon, we're admitting you right now. And, as I tell it in my keynote, it's like this sort of metaphorical trajectory of success just comes crashing down. And, it was like, what the fuck? I've spent my whole life, everything being perfect. And here I am being told this certainly wasn't a convenient diagnosis at that time. And it really threw me for a loop. My son is 6 weeks old at this point. And, I tell the doctor, I said, well, I think you're wrong. I'm not supposed to get this. I'm supposed to get breast cancer. Because at the same time, I grew up, my mom had been diagnosed with breast cancer when I had been in the 6th grade. So I guess that's around 11. And ironically, so she was sitting in chemotherapy at that time when I was in the ER, because she had her breast cancer had moved to a stage 4 and all of that. So I call my mom and I'm like, oh my God, they're telling me this. And she talks to her oncologist, who had become a family friend over the years, and the oncologist's perspective was, hey, I wouldn't bring my dog to that hospital, which really at that time was not far from the truth in terms of medical communities and reputation. So I got unplugged from the painkillers. My mom's oncologist said, hey, go see this neurosurgeon here in Atlanta. And again, they don't know, like, doctors are human, and you'll see this is a theme in my story, is I think we put physicians on pedestals, not understanding that they're just as human as we are. And now that I work with a lot of them too, as clients, like, I see that more than ever. In fact, many are very poor business people, and but we put them on pedestals, I think, when we're sick and we're in crisis mode. So regardless, I stopped taking the painkillers. I go see this neurosurgeon that my mom's oncologist says to go see. He looks at this point, it was a CT scan. I hadn't even done an MRI. He's like, well, it's not an emergency, but you need to have this thing taken out. And that's about all they knew at this point. What I had going for me, which there's no doubt is a big sort of aspect of the success, is that this tumor had round edges. I didn't, like many glioblastomas, as you well know, the reason they're so deadly is they have these tentacles, and which makes them very hard to resect. And the concern on the location of that tumor at that point was that it backed up to my motor strip. And as I mentioned earlier, I was a collegiate swimmer. I was always an athlete. And, the last thing they wanted to do is for me to lose mobility on one side. So this is what the neurosurgeon's saying. And I'm like really trying to process this. Again, I have a 6-week-old at home. Like, my world has just been turned upside down. As many brain tumor patients know when you get that fateful message. And, I'm processing. I'm like, oh my God, like, I seriously may die, and I have a 6-week-old, and I've just gotten started at everything. And so basically got prepared to go in for my first craniotomy with this neurosurgeon here in Atlanta. And my grandfather was also the COO of the largest pathology group here in Atlanta. And so he made sure that his team was literally in the operating room with their microscopes to look at all the pathology, like right there in the surgical room, in the OR, which that was kind of cool. But I was still processing, like, oh my God, I'm going to have brain surgery, which is scary for anybody, especially the first time. And especially, again, back as context, I had never had surgery in my life. I had a C-section 6 weeks before. That was the first surgery I'd ever had. So this was a big thing. It was, again, a big emotional lift to go through. And so I have this surgery, and as so many brain tumor patients know, once you recover, like, you're sitting there, your head's in bandages. I was constantly getting told how sorry people were, like I was dead, which actually really still to this day makes me mad. I was being victimized. I felt like that because that wasn't who I was. And I kept telling these nurses that I was going to be fine. And like, their faces, they just didn't know who they were talking to, I think was probably part of it. But and again, I kind of felt bad for them because they didn't know that the joke was on them, essentially, that like who I was, and they just know the gravity of this diagnosis. And, so I'm going through this, the neurosurgeon comes back in, and my husband's in there with me, and of course everybody wants a percentage of resection. I think being far enough out from this and reading and hearing enough stories and talking to families multiple times every month, like everybody wants the percentage. And, it was like 95% or some BS like that. So that's what he says. And he said we did the very best we could. And, we would really recommend that you go ahead and start radiation down at this other hospital and all of that. And it was like my husband, and we'll get to that part of the story, was a formal naval aviator. And while I'm a type A person, he's a triple A type person. So it's very methodical, look at the details. And so thankfully, because of my grandfather and all of his colleagues as the pathologists, they had pulled multiple slides. Well, we sent a slide out to Emory. We sent a slide out to MD Anderson. We sent slides to Duke. We sent slides, Andrew, everywhere, because there was no way that we were going to accept whatever this particular hospital had said. And, that was the first really great thing that we did, like looking back, because part of my story is around patient advocacy. And there was a GBM patient, and she has since passed away. She passed away when I was in the middle of chemotherapy, actually. She had written a book about this with glioblastoma patient advocacy, and I had read that and really spoke to me. It still speaks to me. She's no longer here, of course, but I think when it's back to putting doctors on pedestals, and we'll get more into that. So I got this path report. It was pretty crappy. That hospital was like, well, it's probably like a grade 3, like an anaplastic astrocytoma. Emory was calling it a 4, was calling it a GBM. And Duke and MD Anderson, they were somewhere in the spectrum. Basically, like it wasn't good. So that prompted us wanting to get second opinions. Well, that doctor, when we were looking at Duke, his take on Henry Friedman was, well, he's a cowboy, and suggesting that perhaps he's riskier than he should be, which is ironic as this story unfolds, as you'll see that he would have that perspective. And so this guy, again, is wanting me to go ahead and get into radiation, begin treatment now. Well, since we sent the slides out to these places, Duke immediately offered us a clinical trial. And literally when my husband spoke to Duke, at that time, we packed a suitcase. Like, I've never done that in my life. Like, they're like, we have a clinical trial. We think you should come up and take a look at it. We packed a suitcase within an hour. And again, you live in the UK, but from Atlanta, Duke, or Raleigh, Durham is about 6 hours away. There's no point in even flying. It's like that borderline. Do you actually pay to get on the plane and deal with the airports? So we just got in the car. We drove up there, went to go see Henry Friedman. And I think there were a couple things about Duke when I went. There were several takeaways on that first visit. Number one, clinically, they had very much of a team approach, which I had never seen, and still to this day, I haven't seen in any other doctor model. Of course, those are beginning to evolve more. And what I mean by that is we went into one room, in comes the oncologist, the neuro-oncologist, in comes the neurosurgeon, and in comes all the PAs. So it was truly a team approach on approaching the case, which was kind of, I guess, from a business and from a clinical perspective, was very reassuring. Their motto also was, at Duke, there is hope. And nobody felt sorry for me. Nobody told me they were sorry and apologizing. What did they have to apologize for? It was like, we're on this. Here's what we do. Here are the numbers. Here's what we see in terms of survival. And we don't believe that you have to die. And that was their approach, which is what I needed to hear at that point. It's still what I need to hear. I'm able to do more of that myself, but at that time it was very reassuring. Now, when it gets interesting, which was the next lowest point in this whole process I'm getting ready to get to, is the neurosurgeon we spend time. He looks at the post-op CAT scan, which you might be like, why in the world would the first guy do a post-op CAT scan? we still don't know to this day. Like, he never did a post-op MRI, so I never even had a post-op MRI. But his comment was, who did your first surgery? Well, as you can probably deduce, that's not a very good question to ask. And apparently almost half of that tumor had been left unbeknownst to us. Okay, so that's where my story goes really south really fast, because I'm thinking, like, back to what I was saying earlier, hey, what percentage did you get out? 95%, we did the best we could. And Duke is telling me, oh my God, they're like, you need to go do this thing again. He's left over half of this thing in there. It's still resectable. And I'm thinking, okay, well, this is a neurosurgeon telling me he wants to cut. So, you know, I'm not 100%. Clearly, I still have brain tumors sitting in my head. But even me at that point, I'm like, okay, is he just wanting to cut? And that's kind of his sort of motivation. And given the fact that we're being told that it was a bad first resection, we're like, okay, that's great. We get, and we understood the plan, because Duke also had this approach where this is 15 years ago, where they did this rotational regimen of chemotherapy. It spoke to me because it was very much sort of chemotherapy by diversification, and every quarter they would rotate their drug regimen. And, you know, managing assets and being an investment advisor, like, that really spoke to me. But we said, well, you know what? We're set to go talk to MD Anderson. And we could tell that Duke was a little taken aback by that. But by now, like, we're shopping neurosurgeons. We're not going to, like, just accept based on what happened the first time. And so we're kind of putting Duke on hold a little bit. We get on a plane, we go to Houston. MD Anderson, ironically, is right across the street from Rice University, which is where I spent my freshman year of undergraduate school. And going to MD Anderson, their approach was not as much of a team approach as Duke. They had the neurosurgeon come in. That was almost a separate appointment from when the neuro-oncologist would come in. And MD Anderson says, who did your first surgery? And so again, now we got confirmation that, you know, this was a mess and this needed to be cleaned up. And they wanted to redo it as well. The difference between MD Anderson and Duke, besides the clinical team approach, was also that MD Anderson wanted to do a functional MRI before redoing the surgery, where Duke wanted to redo it awake. Given the fact that my motor strip was there, they didn't want me to lose mobility, all of that. And their approach, again, this is all at that time, and understand for any patients, I mean, you know, that have gone through this, with 15 years ago, all these drugs have changed, but MD Anderson at that time said, look, we're going to throw Temodar at it until you have a recurrence. Well, that doesn't sound very promising, but that was kind of their approach at that time. Functional MRI, Temodar until recurrence, where Duke was, we're doing the surgery awake so we don't nick anything, and so we get, you know, a better resection, and then we do this chemotherapy by diversification, essentially. And again, I'm out of it. I mean, I got this thing still hanging out in my brain. I know something's off. I've known something's off, and I had told the first surgeon that even after. And everybody's like, well, you're having a bad day. Well, no shit, I'm having a bad day. You left half the tumor in there and didn't tell us about it. So bottom line was, after that visit at MD Anderson, we went out to dinner. And my husband said, you know what, I can't make this decision for you. You have to make it. And I'm thinking, I'm still in such a whirlwind. I mean, again, my life has literally been turned upside down, and certainly not as expected. And I said, I think I want to go to Duke. Because at MD Anderson, just like at that first hospital, they kept apologizing to me. And that doesn't play for me. That doesn't work. But so we end up going to Duke, and so that was kind of good. So the story gets better from there. We go to Duke, we redo the surgery. which was the second craniotomy now, it was a cleanup. And because they couldn't do the clinical trial until I had a clean resection, they had just assumed it was clean. So they did the second craniotomy. It lasted 6 hours. I was awake. I'm very known even to this day over there. And I remember it specifically. I tried to sell the neurosurgeon long-term care insurance. I mean, I remember so much of that surgery, Andrew, it's insane. And I remember the discussions we had with the PA. And I also remember that my anesthesia wore off near the end. So they had to get me more. So I remember all of this probably better than 99.9 brain tumor patients. I also remember the smell. I always say it smells a lot like you're at the dentist, and when they're drilling or, with that sort of, I don't know what the right word is, but it's a very bio smell of when they're working on your teeth. Anyway, so as it turns out, now I get a post-op MRI, and I finally get a clean resection. At this point, there's nothing left in there. The MRI looks great. And now we can move on to the clinical trial, which again, all this has changed so much. But at that time, it was an injection of what they called an interleukin 13, IL-13. And by the way, that it's not around anymore. I believe I'm the only person still alive in my group. But what it was, this was when the mechanics and fluids, and forgive me because I have an engineering degree, it's when they were starting to inject things through catheters into your brain, which were sort of localized chemotherapy. That's when they were really playing around with it. Yeah.
This is what's called convection enhanced delivery. The catheter delivering drugs into the brain. And yeah, so
I think that was pretty cutting edge.
Yeah. And the benefit of this is that you're going straight into the brain. You're bypassing the blood-brain barrier, and it's very targeted as well.
Right, but you hadn't had genetic testing and what everybody talks about now. Like none of that existed in 2005. So you have to understand the state of the science in 2005 is very different 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm. So would this have been a phase 1 clinical trial?
I was a phase 3 actually.
Okay.
So it had been tested. I felt like, hey, the risk is not going to be as bad because I'm not a phase 1. And it was for those of us that hadn't had a recurrence yet. So, and the way, again, just the science was so different at that time.
Yeah.
And so then I had to go have a third surgery to have the catheters put in. But I had to wait till I was recovered a little bit from the second surgery. It's also of note, and I don't mind being as candid, not that I haven't been candid at this point, but the doctor here in Atlanta, had me taking aspirin post-surgery. And so Duke was horrified because it delayed even when they could do the second cleanup craniotomy because of the thinning of the blood. They had done a post-op CAT scan in Atlanta instead of a post-op MRI. He had me on aspirin, and he wasn't candid enough about the resection. And I would not have even been able to get that clinical trial had I started treatment. And I guess the moral to that story, and where I talk to a lot of families, is the day you begin treatment, a lot of things are off the table. And so if you're going to get second opinions, you're going to want to go do it before you start anything, because once they start basically frying your brain, which is what radiation is, all bets are off in terms of any pivots that you need to make in the course of your treatment. And at least that's been my understanding. And that was certainly what the case was for me. So, I always talk about, at least in my world, nobody knows. It's the same thing with CPAs or accountants as well as financial advisors. You don't know if somebody's good until they do something really bad. And that was certainly the case for me with neurosurgeons. I can't go say, hey, show me your portfolio of craniotomies so I can see how good you are or that you're not. So, and again, he didn't hurt me, and so I've left with that aspect. But it's a little irritating looking back that I guess greater candor would have been beneficial at that time. But again, at this point, it's water under the bridge, and I've moved on as best I can. But to keep going with where I went with Duke, because I participated in this clinical trial and I had to sit in the ICU for, I think it was like a week at that time. I was fully functional. It really, I don't want to say it wasn't a big deal, because it's a big deal, but in a lot of the keynotes I give, I talk about a lot. There was a woman in the room next to me that had stroked out while having a baby. And there was a man in the room to the right of me that had a massive motorcycle accident right there in Durham, and I'm the healthiest person in the ICU. I mean, I'm talking to my friends, I'm watching TV, I'm doing stuff. So it was really disconcerting that everything had hit to that gravity, but I knew I was on the right track. And so once the infusion finished over that 7-day period, now I was able to begin radiation. Duke's condition for that clinical trial was that I do radiation there in Durham as opposed to locally, because it had to do with, when they ran that clinical trial, it had to do with the sequencing of whether you had done radiation before or after, or chemotherapy before and after. But bottom line is, we had to move to Durham for a 6-week period where I did what at that time was sort of the gold standard around radiation, which was still nowhere near as targeted and specific as it is now. But I'm sure many patients can relate to this, and most of the public doesn't, but I'm very open about talking about it. I was very resentful during that period because, especially in Durham, which is essentially the cigarette capital of the world, that's what Duke University is founded on with the Duke family. There were people outside that radiation building that were just chain smoking. And here I am pushing a, basically a stroller with a 6-week-old into a massive waiting room where, I felt like, why the fuck am I here? I'm 30 years old. I've done everything right in my life. And like, what karmically did I do to sort of upset the balance of the universe to get this diagnosis where there's people who have chain smoked their entire life? And that's emotionally at that time where I was about it. But I also talk a lot about, before going onto a certain machine, there were smaller waiting rooms where those of us that were waiting for a machine would be in there, and everybody was dying. And again, I felt like, oh my God, I'm the healthiest person in here. And the discussions in those rooms were very intense. And somebody who hasn't gone through something as serious and some form of deadly disease or cancer or whatever might never fully understand that experience. But it was very intense, and I still think about those people. And I doubt, frankly, that many of them are still alive. And there are only 4 of us. And it was pretty intense. So I did radiation Duke, and that was the summer. I always say it was the summer of Hurricane Katrina, which was a massive hurricane here in the U.S. And I still remember all of that and many of those experiences during that summer living there. And it was hard being away from home. And every morning I always say I go fry my brain essentially. And then we head home back to the corporate apartment that we lived in up there. And, I thank goodness that, we had the resources to be able to do that, because not everybody does. So after my sort of 6-week, radiation treatment and living in Durham, we went back home to Atlanta, and I was able to do chemotherapy in Atlanta as prescribed by Duke. Duke would work closely with the local doctors. Duke was able to get many things approved through the insurance that nobody in Atlanta could do, just because of the nature, the cutting edge nature of that brain tumor center. And, I was still running my business, and I would block deliberate time when I knew I would be sick, and then make sure that I didn't have client meetings scheduled. I did work out through radiation. I felt like I'd sleep, but I'd go do walks, runs on some of the trails, and I would lift. So I tried to make sure, I would listen to my body. Like, that was everything. Listen to your body, and once I'm not tired, go do something physical, as opposed to being, cooped up inside. And so that's how I did it. I occasionally took some client calls and some emails. And again, through chemotherapy, just paced myself, slow and steady. And what I found was, a lot of people ask me, well, what impact did all of this have on you? Outside of the emotion, which is, of course, huge for all of us, for anybody that survives something major like this, really, other than some right peripheral vision, everybody says that they're blessed, but I'm extraordinarily lucky to really not have any other lasting effects. But it did take me a while, I would say, right after these craniotomies, I think, for all of the brain connections to come back into play, and that my attention with deeper, detailed reading, especially for my industry, like, I didn't just jump into it. It took a while, and eventually it's just like mind muscle memory. It came back, but it took some time, and it took some effort, and it took some intentionality with really trying to push through that. But that was, and then it's of note to say, so my mom ends up dying of breast cancer when I'm in the middle of chemotherapy. And, subsequently after the chemotherapy, I ended up getting divorced. So I had a lot of life-changing events happen in a very short period of time. And, I never want to be known as the brain tumor chick or cancer chick, because in the business community, that's not good. But I see myself as resilient. And, I talk a lot about makeup of who we are. And yes, I had glioblastoma. That's many aspects of who I am, and it certainly makes up how I'm wired. But there's so many other pieces and parts to me that it doesn't need to be the only thing. So in answer to your original question, like, how did I survive this? It's a combination of dumb luck, kick-ass medical treatment at Duke, and I believe just how I'm sort of wired anyway to come up with these micro goals with getting through certain phases of treatments and what I needed to do. And I had clear purpose. I had purpose with my son, and I had purpose. I mean, I love my business, and, that I had things that I wanted to be doing. I'm a very goal-oriented person, in case you didn't figure that one out. And that, that has helped me. And I know not everybody is like that, and everybody's journey is their own, and I'm respectful of that. But that was my journey. That was my story. And I know it's different, but I think there is reason to have hope, but a lot of it's just dumb luck. It really is. Had I not had clean edges, I wouldn't be here. Had I accepted what that first guy in Atlanta said, hey, go do radiation, and I didn't mention this, maybe you'll live a year. Yeah, I'd be dead. No question. Had Duke not cleaned that surgery up, and by the way, they said the guy left a ton of blood. It took them 3 hours to clean up the first mess before they could really get in there and do anything. So, and doctors, we should never put doctors on pedestals. We should always shop them out. We should always try to get second opinions, and, not take the easiest approach. We should question everything and understand the why, and have good advocates that are watching out for us. So that's kind of my story.
Yeah, I think you summed it up pretty well. There is this reluctance to have a treatment that diverges from the standard of care. That's something I've noticed. You mentioned how other medical professionals are seeing Duke, maybe in terms of how they are giving hope to patients with their so-called risky treatments. Would you say that they were perhaps defining risky as simply being a divergent idea, and even just their treatment modalities just being different from the standard of care? That was why they were hesitant about it.
Okay, so here's how I would take it, and this sounds like a very elitist perspective, but I'm just going to go there. This guy, he was a neurosurgeon who clearly couldn't even get the first tumor out, didn't have the skill set, didn't know enough, where like he's operating in fifth grade world, where Henry Friedman is like, the freshman in college. So you're looking at a skill set that you can't even compare. So to arbitrarily say, oh, he's a cowboy, that guy just doesn't know. And so, I believe that certainly if insurances or socioeconomically, if you can afford to just get another opinion, like we owe it to ourselves to do that and get another perspective. And the same thing is true with many aspects of our life. And I think, Andrew, to your point, it was just a way of him just not knowing and just to arbitrarily say that. And I've struggled, I talked about it. It sounds like, hey, I have this massive hang up. And maybe I do have a little bit of a hang up. My mother's oncologist, by the way, said, like in my mother's hospital room as she's dying, she's like, she apologized for even referring me that guy who's still a well-respected neurosurgeon here in Atlanta. And she's like, you know what, you should send him a letter. And, I've thought about that a lot, but I'm like, okay, the letter would only really be for me. And then I could just tear it up, I guess. I don't know. But in answer to your question, he just didn't know. And until, you get the opinion from what you believe to be the foremost expert in something, we shouldn't accept that as reality.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience with a neurosurgeon for my brain tumor after my hemorrhage. I had several misdiagnoses, and then 6 weeks after my operation, I was told over the phone it was actually a highly malignant brain tumor with a poor prognosis. And he was just apologizing to me, and I was just struck by just the news. I couldn't take it in, so I didn't know how to reply to him. But yeah, I can draw similar parallels with my own story, especially when you mentioned how your tumor was incredibly vascular. And I can relate to that because mine was a very similar situation. They were struggling to get enough of it to do the histopathology because most of it went down the sink. It was just so vascular. You mentioned, I'd like to discuss access to and awareness of clinical trials. You mentioned your experiences with the interleukin-13 trial, which you say is no longer a thing as a treatment. And you mentioned how other patients didn't do so well. You were the only survivor after, I think you were saying, if you can correct me on that if I'm wrong.
Yeah, well, we read a white paper like several years later, and I can't definitively tell you like what my patient number was within that, but when you look at the stats in there, I mean, it was pretty bleak after. Look, I think we all need hope. Yeah. And at that point, again, I was 30. I had a 6-week-old son at home, and like I'm throw the kitchen sink at me. I was a college athlete. I felt like I could handle it, and I was willing to do that at that time. And I think there is a double-edged sword to that, which you're getting ready to go there. Like, hey, are we willing to take unnecessary risks? And does that benefit us or hurt us? I don't know if that's where you're going with it. I was willing to take some risks. Had it been a phase 1, probably not so much.
Why do you think you did so well compared to others that you had read about?
I don't know. Why have I done better in this whole thing? I still have survivor's guilt over it. This is why I do stuff in this industry some. I can't sit and I'll talk to families. Again, I talk to probably 3 families a month. but I've gone to too many funerals, and from a mindset, Andrew, I don't mean to get woo woo on you. It brings me down. Like, I'm happy to tell my story. I'm happy to do keynotes periodically, but I have to put guardrails around that because I mean, this is fucking depressing. And I don't mean to be Debbie Downer, but like, I have to take my emotional energy and apply it here when I can, and then have to have it other times I can't do it because I don't need to be constantly thinking about this. There's a reason that I'm 15 years out. I can't tell you exactly what that is, but I can tell you that I can't wallow in this because I'm not leading the kind of life that I want if I do that. I want to create hope for people, knowing that it's possible to live for 15 years. But who's to say that next year I don't get a recurrence? I certainly hope not. I'm certainly not planning for that. But I can't obsess over it. And if I sit in this industry all the time on all the group Facebook pages, it doesn't do me any good because I get to see all the yucky stuff that happens. But I will tell you on a personal level, because my story is as much about mindset and psychology as it is about glioblastoma. I sat in a survivors sort of live video chat forum, and this one woman, her husband was dying and it didn't look good and he was not doing well. And she told me, well, that I'm going to get a recurrence. Like, I didn't see where she sat, where she could tell me what was going to happen to me. And I get that she had a lot going on with her husband, but I was like, you know what? I don't need to do this. If somebody's going to sit there and tell me that I'm never cured and I'm never out of the woods, I go back to Duke for my annual MRI. I'm a big foodie. We end up always talking about cool restaurants in Durham. It's a social visit more than anything else. And that's where I am with it. But I can't wallow in this space. I need to set an example. And part of my value system is to do that and to let people know that there's hope, and periodically to jump in with certain families that need some guidance. I do that. And past that, I can't constantly be on brain tumor forums because I can't be a good mom. I can't be a good spouse. I can't be a good business owner, and I can't be a good financial advisor if all I'm sitting around is worrying about when I'm going to get a recurrence. So that's, it's a tough road to walk. And I mean, there was a time in the beginning where that's all you think about. I mean, you've probably been down that road. You question every aspect of your mortality. And in some ways, it makes me a better advisor because I've been through this and I understand what financial legacy means, not just academically like other advisors, but internally. I get it. I have, I still, all of us face death every day. It's just how we choose to frame it based on our history. And I can't get pulled down. I can't do it. Otherwise I might not continue to have this trajectory. So I have to look at it from a positive point of view. This happened. I can tell the story. I want to give people hope, but I'm not going to wallow in it. And I'm certainly not going to have somebody that doesn't know me to tell me that I'm going to get a recurrence.
Your thoughts and feelings definitely have some influence on your physiology and your neurobiology. So I definitely agree that
Yep.
makes a difference. I noticed you mentioned you had a pathologist in your family.
Well, he's not a pathologist. He was the chief operating officer of the largest pathology group in Atlanta.
Yeah.
So they were able to pull everybody in that first operating room to look at the slides.
Did that help you in any way looking at the genetic profile of the tumor as to what may or may not be benefiting you? No?
In 2005, they didn't do that.
Well, did you ever have that looked at in future, just out of curiosity?
Nope, I haven't had the need to. Duke certainly has all the slides still sitting out there. What they did do at that time, again, I come back to, you have to remember the medicine. 15 years is, like 100 dog years in medicine. And they did run, before they did the clinical trial, they just tested the drug on the slide and had good results before they went ahead and did it. But that was about the extent of it at that time. And, I hope it doesn't come to that, but I continue to want to maintain a great relationship with Duke, because if the time ever comes, and I'm going on to the assumption that it's not because I'm staying on top of stuff, like I have a great relationship and I get prioritized to get this taken care of, and where I know that they have the skill set, the research, and the R&D teams to, be able to do all of that and whatever's cutting edge at that time.
Yeah, I feel like it would have been interesting to see if there was any mutations that may have been preferential that helped you to have a positive response to these treatments and the chemotherapy. What kind of chemotherapy did you have? Was it just the Temodar?
No, so if you remember, that was MD Anderson's approach, was Temodar until recurrence, where Duke's, remember, was a rotational regimen every quarter.
Mm-hmm.
So one of them with Duke was just Temodar. I'm going to try to get it right. One was Gleevec. One was CPT11, which is a carboplatin, which was, again, big way back when, combined with Avastin, which I know became more mainstream after. And another was a Temodar and Avastin, I believe, were the combinations. But we did a rotational regimen every 3 months, is how it worked. And again, other than Temodar, and I think Avastin is still relevant in the brain tumor community now, but I know, to your point, everybody wants to know, well, what did you do? But the medicine's just changed so drastically, it's almost irrelevant, because the data sets now, like everything has evolved to get better and better.
Well, I think it's also very personalized. I know some other long-term survivors, not many because it's a rare thing, long-term survivors of GBM, some have been using tamoxifen.
Yeah, they had me do that too. So, Duke did that right after I finished chemotherapy for a year. It was like, at that time, 10x the usual breast cancer dosage. But I thought for sure I'd get side effects with that, but I had none, absolutely zero. The other thing I did, which I didn't bring up, a lot of people ask this question via email, like, did you do anything naturally? And I think she's still really big in the industry. I did consult with Jean Wallace. I think she's up in Utah. I liked her business model, because unlike a lot of other natural people where their profit and loss is built around the sale or repping certain supplements, hers wasn't at all. She was fee-based. She billed by the hour. She referenced clinical trials on every suggestion and exactly what it did. Where it was everything from, at that time, fish oil to reduce inflammation. I mean, there's a whole, she built a whole report. And again, did it help? I don't know. Did the trial help? I don't know. I can't tell you, and nobody can prove things one way or another, but it gave me more hope at that time. But I would also argue that also working out was huge. I did 2 triathlons in the middle of chemotherapy. So it's like, we don't know what causes this, and we don't know why people get better outcomes. But what I know is this, is based upon the medicine that was available at that time, I went to arguably one of the most cutting edge brain tumor centers. I relied on them. I listened to my body. I worked out. I lived my life. And that's what I did. And I think people want the magic pill, the magic bullet. And I don't know that there is one. I do know that patient advocacy is huge, and I come back to, we should not be putting these doctors on pedestals, and we shouldn't accept any one person's opinion until you feel like you've gotten the most cutting edge person that you believe is out there in the world that you can get to.
Going back to tamoxifen, it's interesting you mentioned you have a history of breast cancer in your family.
Very much so.
Because there are a subsection of glioblastoma brain tumors that the theory is, and some of the results suggest, that they respond quite well to tamoxifen as a chemotherapeutic agent. So,
Do you use it more like a supplement after, essentially? And my mother's breast cancer was estrogen based. It was not HER2 positive. And I know I did get tested for the BRCA gene, and I don't have that. So, but again, I'm more, I need another primary cancer, like I need another hole in my head. So I stay on top of that probably even more than I do. I don't really need to do a lot at this point with Duke. I mean, I go for my annual visit. It turns into a pseudo vacation. Like I always get my MRI Monday morning because I can get back on the road and get to the office Tuesday with my team. And we'll leave Friday. And there's again, you guys, I don't know if you have some equivalent in the UK, but the James Beard Award is like the iconic restaurant award. And so there's always a few James Beard Award winners, ironically, in Raleigh-Durham. So we go on we get our cool reservations, we stay at our fun hotel, we go work out, and one of my best friends lives in that area. We go hang out with her and her family, and I get my scan. I love barbecue, and that area is like the hub of barbecue in this country for pork barbecue. I get my celebratory pork sandwich, and we get on the road and we go back to Atlanta.
I was just about to ask, is there any particular diet that you follow, or do you just try and maintain a healthy lifestyle?
I maintain a healthy lifestyle.
Yeah. And lots of exercise.
Yeah, but it's the right amount. It's not like an insane amount. It's, you try to eat healthy, and you try to, work out 5 days a week. I track all of that. I mean, I have key performance indicators I track with work, and one of them actually is also personal. It's how many workouts did I get in that week? I just don't think there's a magic bullet. It's we all want that. But
yeah. I feel as though it's likely a combination of things. You've had a history where you have had a combination of different treatments, and also your mindset. I know some people would discount that because it doesn't sound very scientific, but it's a whole science in itself.
Well, listen, I have an industrial engineering degree. There are very few people that will listen to this, or that are family members that have taken as much mathematics and advanced science and then work in finance like I do. So you're talking to Queen of Analytical. And I hear you when somebody might say that, but if you look at my fact pattern, you can't discount that. It's the same question, I think, in life. Like, what makes person A more financially successful than person B if they came from the same exact background? It's the same thing. It's the same thing in medicine, I believe.
I feel as though just what you said initially about seeking a second opinion, I would echo that and say seeking a second, third, fourth, fifth opinion is vital. And finding the right hospital. You were fortunate to be able to go to Duke, where they think a bit differently. What would you advise patients in that respect, in terms of just where to look for and how to access clinical trials and novel therapies?
Well, usually if, I sat on, I was part of at one time, the Southeastern Brain Tumor Foundation and some of their committees. So I was seeing where the research was being done, at least here in the Southeast. And again, you don't have to read much. I don't have to, again, sit on all these Facebook groups to see where the cutting edge research is being done. And then again, talking to families around the country, I'm seeing where they're going and where they're having success and where they're not. And, at least in the US, when I see stuff, it tends to be Duke, University of California, San Francisco, UMass. In fact, the guy that runs it at UMass is from Duke. He was one of my doctors. And again, MD Anderson isn't exactly a slouch, but I do the due diligence where somebody is so focused and specialized and they have a specific brain tumor center. And if you haven't gone there, and don't let location be the thing that precludes you from being able to go in just to get an opinion. And I tell families when I talk to them, always get multiple slides and always get, the films, on a USB or a disc or whatever to where somebody else can look at it. Again, had I accepted my first surgery and didn't know that it wasn't good at all, I wouldn't have known to get a clean-up craniotomy, and I would have just begun treatment, and I would not be here talking to you today.
It's quite concerning in a way.
It's very concerning.
Yeah. You're fortunate to have had...
and hence my point. Do I write him a letter? And tell him clinically, you should have done a post-op MRI. You could have been more forthcoming with the results. And your PA shouldn't have told me I was having a fucking bad day. Because...
Well, I think often with these things as well, if you ask for opinions on a neurosurgeon, it's such a specialist field. They're always going to say, oh, they're one of the best in the world. You're fortunate to be seeing them. But because it's such a specialist field, there's not that many of them, so they're bound to be one of the best in the world. That would be correct, but they're the best of a select few.
Well, at least here in Atlanta, in Southern United States, I mean, we have 3 major neurosurgery practices, and Emory's here too. And I had talked to Emory too. Originally, before I went with the guy that couldn't cut, I chose to pick the attractive surgeon who couldn't cut, as opposed to doing what I should have done to begin with. But I think the issue is more of, as human beings, when we go into crisis mode, we want to act and do something about it. And I don't know about you, but when you got something, toting around in your head that's impacting how you make decisions and how you process stuff, you want it out. You to the point where I've never felt so I just need this thing out. I just need this thing out. And but my midline had shifted a ton, and, God only knows. And not just that, but that, they were giving, I know the standard of care at that time was, a ton of Decadron and, hey, take this and you'll be better. Well, I was having reactions, not with the Decadron, but with an anti-seizure med at that time that was, as it turned out much later, Duke found it out, was interfering with my liver enzymes. And so I was woozy all the time. I couldn't think clear-headed at all. And that's not who I am. I mean, I'm a very, very organized, have my stuff together, again, run groups, things like that. But I knew that I wasn't 100%. And I remember having dinner with some family and telling my grandmother, I'm like, everything is woozy. This is not right. And that should have been something basic that the first group should have figured out. And I come back to, can I fault them? He didn't have the skill set. No, but it sure would have been nice if he had.
You mentioned anticonvulsants. Had you experienced any seizures, or was this a preventative measure?
No, so they put me on them just in case.
What did they put you on? Because there are some anti-epileptic drugs that actually have survival benefit, and others can help to sensitize the tumor to the chemotherapies.
So originally, again, I come back to, remember, things have evolved. So this was 2005. They had me on Dilantin. because also gelantin could be administered intravenously in the middle of a craniotomy, which was also key. And so I was on gelantin. Then, and we used that through the second surgery at Duke. And I told Duke, I'm like, there's just something off. And then they said, well, let's change your drug to Keppra, which I forget the
generic
other
name.
Thank you. The generic starts with an L or whatever. Yeah. So
Leveracetam.
Exactly. I do that refill all the time, and I know it's LEV, and then past that.
It's a long one.
Yeah. So I've been on that since like 2006 and never had an issue. The one time I had an issue, I wasn't compliant. We had been in Napa Valley. I hadn't brought my meds up, and was like, you know what, I'll be fine. And ended up going back to work. I'm in the middle of this big meeting, and I went down like a rock, and I was like, well, there it is. So I guess I need to be compliant. So I've been compliant since then, but that was like in 2006. So.
Yeah, it's interesting because I purposely put my, after I had my diagnosis of epilepsy and had some quite horrible seizures, I purposely put myself on a mixture of Keppra, the levetiracetam, and Epilim, which is sodium valproate. Okay. And the reason I did that is because I noticed that sodium valproate could be what's called an HDAC inhibitor, which is a good thing if you have any kind of cancer. But for the brain, I read studies on that, and I thought that would be a good one to be on, even though they don't recommend going on it because it can mess up your mood and mental health.
Interesting.
And I put myself on the Keppra because I knew that my tumor was not chemosensitive, and I started to have chemotherapy before eventually abandoning it. So I put myself on very high doses of both of those. And I was still having grand mal seizures at that time. So, yeah.
Well, I think what people don't realize with those grand mal seizures, and it sounds like you know way more than I do about it, but the one that I had, it took everything out of me. Like I was
it's horrific.
Days. My goodness.
It's like it feels like you've run a marathon without any health benefits associated.
Well, exactly.
Running.
Like, I haven't done anything. I've laid on the floor convulsing. Like, how physically exhausting is this? I've done triathlons that are less physically exhausting than having a grand mal seizure.
Yeah, it took me a few years to come off it completely on my own against all medical advice because I was still having these seizures, but I managed to do it by natural means and a lot of trial and error. So I think sometimes with these things, trial and error is a good and bad experience.
Yeah. Well, we have to be willing to test certain things and see what works.
Yeah. I know that you've been involved with the OurBrainBank initiative. I don't know if that's the right term to use, but the whole, our OurBrainBank movement, it's a movement as well of patient advocacy and access to these other treatments away from the standard of care, because the standard of care is achieving the standard results, which are not favorable. That it's not really changing the landscape in terms of prognosis of these high-grade gliomas. How did you become involved with the initiative, and what's your goal with this?
So Jessica Morris, who founded it, her neighbor in New York called me. It was when she had first been diagnosed. Back to, remember how I said I talked to 2 or 3 families a month, probably? Mm-hmm. He's like, hey, will you talk to my neighbor? His wife has gotten this really crappy diagnosis, and this was years ago. And so I talked to him, to Ed is his name, and told him my experience, told him some things to look out for, in the context of my story. And that's how it started. And Jessica obviously had done really well, and she's wired very similarly to how I am, where we just go after it. And we just connected. And then as she got better, she started this nonprofit. And she's like, here's my vision, here's the business plan. I really want you to be kind of part of this. And as I'm developing it, and we became friends. And so I agreed to sit on the board, and have kind of watched it since its evolution as she was really kind of mapping it out. And so that's how I know Jessica and how I got involved.
It's quite remarkable what she's doing. I was at the UK launch, and it's big thinking. It's thinking on a large scale. Yeah, I'm hopeful of how we can expand this so that more patients can hear about what could help them, because I feel like there's this lack of communication of other avenues of treatment and other options. You're just told that there's nothing else available and there's nothing you can really do, just enjoy your life. And you mentioned how you were told, this was years ago, from one hospital, that their advice would be to continue taking temozolomide indefinitely until you had a recurrence. This is still...
Yes, that was MD Anderson's approach at that time. It was, hey, bad first surgery, who did it? Our approach is functional MRI. We attempt another craniotomy, and then with the chemotherapy, Temodar, like you said, until recurrence, and then we pivot to another drug, which at that time they didn't name, because remember, I come back to, it's 2005, so everything has changed so much.
Well, you say it has, but I was advised to do the exact same path. Let's follow the exact same path and have temozolomide indefinitely for cycles, every month, once a week. And I just thought this was ridiculous. I was saying, what's the science like behind this? Because
Right.
Initially it was, well, we'll do it for 6 months and see how it goes. And then I said, well, what happens after the 6 months? And he said, well, we do another 6 months and see how you do. And then another one.
Dead.
Yeah.
He's between the lines. That's what he's trying to say. Sometimes these guys don't. I wish they'd be more direct. It's like if my first guy had been, if he had been courageous enough to say, hey, I did the best I could, but we did leave this amount, and you may want to go get a second opinion instead of go get radiation. Henry Friedman at Duke is a cowboy. I don't think it's a good idea if you go there.
When you were on your clinical trial with the interleukin-13, did you experience any side effects?
No, I really didn't. I mean, I just sat in neuro ICU. The only period of time, I would say there were two things that are kind of intriguing to me, is with the amount of, they were pumping me full of antibiotics too, because it was right post other craniotomy, and they didn't want me to get an infection, which we know, I think a lot of people discount how common that is. That's what kills so many brain tumor patients. It's the infection post-op. And so they were pumping my veins full of vancomycin, which is a very strong antibiotic. And I remember that just burning like hell all through my veins. And eventually my veins were like, because every day they were having to, come give me something. And so by the time I went through that period in neuro ICU with the interleukin, my veins were shot to hell. And the other thing I remember about that time, I talk a lot about this in my keynote. I had a, probably the only epiphany that I've ever had in my life. And, I realized at that point, like I wasn't going to be defined by this. This was not going to be a thing that made up everything of who I was, and that I needed to do something meaningful in my life with this. And I didn't know what that looked like. And so that was another key thing to bring up. And the other thing at that time that was so bizarre to me, even to this day, is, you're in that room nonstop for, I think I was there for a week or 2 weeks or something like that. By the time I left that room, it was like you have, your senses have deadened. I was almost agoraphobic. Like getting out when I left the hospital, I was almost fearful of open spaces. Like we went to go get, again, barbecue. You're in Raleigh, Durham. I was terrified, Andrew. I'm like, oh my God, I've been in a closed space for so long. This is insane that I'm feeling this way. So those were kind of my three big takeaways about that time. But I didn't feel anything funky, didn't have any side effects, just hung out in there.
It's interesting because obviously it asks the question how much of a benefit that clinical trial may have been to you, because that's the difference that I can see from the standard treatments. So it could have been that, or it could have been that plus the other treatments you were doing.
Yeah. Who knows? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, who knows? We don't know. And I think it's easy to hang our hat on that, but if that was the case, then there'd be more people alive that were in that trial.
And as a follow-up, are you having, how often are you having scans now?
Duke says I can do it every 2. I do it every year. I just want to stay on top of it.
Yeah. Do you have any concerns with or have you looked into the effects of the contrast agents? Because that was a huge thing for me, just realizing the research, the more recent studies that are showing retention in the brain and other organs, other tissues.
I haven't heard anything about that, and Duke hasn't brought that up as being an issue. The only thing I would say is a follow-up that's a little different perhaps than some people. Duke has me now ironically taking an aspirin because they're like, we don't know what the effect is 15 years later of all the radiation to your brain, and just with some of the scar tissue, we don't want that kind of creating a stroke at some point. So I just take no different than a supplement. I just take a baby aspirin once a day.
That's interesting. It's interesting you received that advice, because I'd never heard of anyone receiving any follow-up advice for the radiation, knowing myself that many years down the line you can have effects.
Well, and I mean, I still have scar tissue from the resection area and probably from where the radiation is, but the reality is we have no data set. I mean, I talked to one of the gals that I see at Duke, like she wrote, I was reading on some of the things she had published, and when sometimes I do intense workouts in the gym lifting, what I find is if I haven't been in there a while, I get fatigue like the first, I'd say 5 workouts back before my body acclimates. And I'm like curious, I'm like, because I'm a human experiment, one could argue that cognitively I'm more on top of my game than most any other patient, certainly that are 5 or 10 years out. But I have this hyper awareness thing that can be very annoying for myself. But I'm like, why am I having this fatigue? Is this normal? Is this just because of the volume of sets I'm doing? Is this leftover from radiation? Is this, and they just don't know. The reality is there's not a big enough sample size to say, here's what you have to expect. And, they can answer some basic questions, but again, I'm an experiment as much for them. There's much more data around people earlier on.
Yeah, I have very similar experiences to you with this transient fatigue and questioning why that might be. I noticed some benefit after having hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Have you ever considered that? I have a similar experience with the scar tissue.
I haven't tried it, but one could also argue, as they have, I run a more intense work calendar than most anybody else that hasn't had brain tumors. So it's back to, okay, well, are you having it because actually the pandemic in some ways has been easier for me because I've been able to constantly run Zoom meetings instead of being all over town all the flipping time. So it's a chicken or the egg thing. And that's the dynamic of my stuff 15 years later. I don't know why I've survived. I don't know. There's no data on any of it. And in the beginning, and you've probably experienced it as do other survivors, I question, like, again, karmically, what did I do for this to happen? Like, what behavior did I do? What karmically did I do to somebody else for this to happen to me? And at some point we get to acceptance to say, you know what, whether you did or didn't, it doesn't matter. It just is. And that's where I am even with my life now. Like, it just is. There aren't many women that lift what I lift in the gym. There aren't many men or women that run my work calendar the way that I do. It's like I know I'm an anomaly, and there's a burden with that too. And I can vet it with people, and we can pontificate till the cows come home, but I don't know that we're going to get a better answer. And it's back to accept it, live your life, make sure you run your routine appointments with Duke, maintain the relationship. So if something ever bad happens, like, again, they have buy-in to who I am as a human being, and we can react quickly.
Do you have any ideas of what may have caused your tumor? Any theories?
So the one that has gotten tossed around for a long time is, one could argue that that this thing was sitting around there when I was pregnant with my son. And so some theories, and again, nobody can prove it. There's been like 2 things published on it, and I'm sure there's been massive since I last looked, but you get greater blood supply when you're pregnant. And so maybe that magnified what was already there. But here's the real, like, send shivers down your spine. Had I had natural childbirth as opposed to a C-section, like that gal next to me in neuro ICU, likely I would have stroked out. So the fact that I had a C-section may have literally saved my life, unbeknownst to any of us at that time.
That's very interesting. I do know that there is this relationship between female hormones and growth of brain tumors in that certain times of the month. A tumor could, as you say, it's providing more of a blood supply to the tumor, and also your blood sugar levels are fluctuating throughout the month more than a male.
And I come back to, like, we all want to pontificate on the why and why stuff has happened, but I'm at a place in my life where it almost doesn't matter anymore. It's, so it happened, I'm at acceptance, so what do I do here with it? Do you know what I'm saying? And it's frustrating, I think, for many people, because we all need answers on what did we do, what behavior did we engage in, what happened. And again, I was there for years, Andrew. It's easy, and I'm not saying that you're wrong, because you're not, but I was obsessing about it. Seriously. And what's even stranger, there were 2 other classmates I went to Georgia Tech with. Same diagnosis. We graduated together. And, like, what are the odds of that? And, it just, we can find all these trends, but we don't know. And I get the interest in the science, because I'm right there with you, but at some point I had to let it go. Just like I had to let the emotion of engaging in certain circles constantly, I had to let that go too, because it affects how I was living my life.
Yeah, it's too much noise, and you can speculate about thousands of different things that may have caused the tumor, not necessarily related to what you may have done, but your environment as well.
Yep.
I did another episode of the podcast where I interviewed a documentary filmmaker on the McCollum Lake Cancer Cluster. I don't know if you know about it. It's this town in Chicago, Illinois, and there's this massive lawsuit where they settled for a few $1 billion. It was quite controversial.
Wow.
And then it got me looking into cancer clusters more, especially these brain cancer clusters, and it's just fascinating. There's so many in the US.
Well, I will tell you, well, mine's right parietal, which is right, that was my cell phone ear. So, and what we were seeing in 2005, that's when that became like a hot theory was, hey, does cell phones cause brain tumors? And I'm sure a lot of the mobile phone companies were paying for the research, but you know, these things get all political and stuff, but you know, it's said that they don't. I'm not convinced of that. Back to, I just know what my experience was. At that time, you know, having earbuds and stuff like that wasn't as common at all. And so, you know, I wouldn't be surprised that that contributed. Can I prove it? No. Does it matter now? No.
Yeah, it's such a hard thing to prove. Some of these things would take many years to even have an effect. I spoke to some doctors about this who have studied brain tumors, and the response I got from them is that even if we could prove it, it would be extremely difficult because these things can take 20, 30 years to have an effect that we can see.
Yep.
Is there anything that you are doing currently to try and prevent a recurrence in terms of maintenance? I know you mentioned the aspirin that could have anti-cancer effects as well as having this effect on the scar tissue, which I hadn't actually considered before, but I'll look into it now. Yeah, is there any other things that you're doing?
No, I'm living my life. I'm setting a good example for my son, for my family, and for my community, and for this community. And I think that's the best thing that any survivor can do. And I'm periodically, again, trying to help families, but not where it's at a detriment of me emotionally.
Yeah, I think the best thing is to provide information rather than direct advice, and to try and signpost people to places where they can get all the information that they need to make their own decisions. Sometimes I think it's off-putting when someone's trying to give advice to people, and there's a lot of bad advice, particularly on the internet, and a lot of information to which can cause more harm than good.
I know, and I completely agree, but I think what a lot of people negate is the fact that, and I see this with a lot of families, when somebody's in crisis mode, they get this crappy diagnosis, the answer is take immediate advice from that provider. Even if, like my situation, if that provider wasn't the best, if I had immediately taken action based upon that referral, like I'd be dead. And so I think it's a combination of give resources, to your point, you know, and then I'm like, here's what I did. Here's my experience because I didn't, or excuse me, here's my experience because I got these second opinions. But, you know, nobody wants, like you said, nobody wants to be told what to do. And certainly, again, I talk a lot about patient advocacy, and I talk a lot about the second opinion thing, a lot of the things that again, OurBrainBank stands for. But, you know, it's a tough thing when people get that diagnosis. They don't want to go get that second opinion, and they don't want to travel. But you know what? Traveling may save your life.
I feel like often, even if patients want to get that second opinion, it's difficult to know where the best place to go to is. How would you make that decision?
So I know the virtual trials site, virtualtrials.com. It's Al Macella's site. He's created really good. It's not the best laid out site, but of all the things that provide a lot of resources, I think that's probably one of the best websites out there. And it lists a lot of those centers. I think, it's a lot about finding, like you said, it's like finding other survivors and understanding what they did and who's getting the research dollars, and consulting the Google machine. I see a lot of people at Duke that come in internationally all the time. Now, they probably have the means to private pay if they're having the means to fly out of the country to the United States to seek treatment. So I think there's a socioeconomic standpoint to this thing too. Because if you have, like a situation like if you're in the UK, I remember for years, the UK, everybody was just like Temodar, Temodar, Temodar. I remember always reading about that. And, but I'd see people in the waiting room in Duke that were definitely not from the United States. And I was like, well, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, there are definitely certain hospitals that are more innovative than others, and that's largely dependent upon money. I know that at Duke, there's the Robert Titch Brain Tumor Center, and he was this, I think he was a millionaire, and his family donated this large sum of money to the center.
He was the U.S. Postmaster General, and he also owned the New York Giants football team.
So money has huge influence. Yeah.
But it also, what's interesting about it, Andrew, it has business implications, because one could argue if Ted Kennedy, Robert Novak, Robert Tisch, like all these high profile people went there, they're not going there because it's a shitty hospital. if they know they have this diagnosis. So again, and my insurance, I mean, it isn't like I write big checks to go to Duke. It's no different than me going to the internist. And I am lucky because I have good insurance, but and I think like everything, I mean, we could spend a lot of time about access to healthcare, and I think that's true in every community. Atlanta certainly has a massive problem with it. But there's definitely a socioeconomic thing to this whole bit. There's a gal here in Atlanta, I had just been talking with her. She just got diagnosed. She has, in the US, what we call an HMO. And, Duke is trying to get some stuff approved. Whether they do or not, I don't know. But it's tough when you don't have good insurance and you don't have the means to private pay. So.
Yeah, that's a huge thing, especially in the US. I feel I don't know too much about it because our system is quite different.
It is, and it's a hot political topic. But I feel, again, guilty and at the same time very happy that I do have access and pay for very good healthcare, because I know the implications if I didn't.
Well, some of the best options are in the US as well as some of the less accessible options.
Yes, so, exactly.
Yeah, it's an interesting dichotomy there.
Yes,
and it's quite similar not similar, but in a way, just how in the UK people, even though some of the treatments are very good and access is very good, many patients are going off to Germany, where there's just new options, or other options rather, particularly involving immunotherapy and just training the immune system to attack these tumors. Is there anything else that you would like to share in terms of what you found over the years?
No, I think I get a lot of, and I don't know who your listeners are or where this gets posted, but I get a lot of questions from, I know some people like to use the word caregivers. I never particularly cared for that word when I was going through stuff. But people, partners, spouses, people that are helping out on what to do and what to say. And for me, it was, and I'm sure you can speak to your experience, but, I wanted good distractions. So for me, it was like, hey, catching a good movie, again, going to go work out. It was, going to the spa to get my mind off of stuff, because if you're going to go fry your brain every morning, like, you just don't want to be thinking about it the rest of the day. Like, what can you do to make some of this a less negative experience. You would think after everything I went through at Duke, as traumatic emotionally as it was, like it would be hard to still go back to Durham, which is why we make it like a pseudo vacation every year, and to create positive anchors with that place that, so there's so much psychology to this that a lot of people don't think about that is so relevant. So I would consider, ask the families, consider that aspect, as well as even patients going through this. Hey, what can I do to get my mind off of this a little bit?
Do you feel like you've changed the way that you work and your lifestyle in terms of stress management?
No, it's probably more stressful.
Really?
But my business
Some people
has
thrive
grown
on stress, I'm sure.
I wouldn't say thrive. I'm very goal oriented,
Yeah,
and
it's
I have
how you manage it.
yeah, but yeah, it is. But that's true for anybody, whether you've had a brain tumor or not. And it's how do you? I think the bigger question is, like, how do you redefine what's important to you and where your values are after you've gone through this? And I definitely reassess that. But remember, I was also 30 and I'm 45 now. So just by virtue of my age, different things are important to me, more important to me now than that versus at that time.
And I suppose you redefine what stress means, because when you've been through a situation of having this devastating diagnosis, it reframes your thinking. So anything that you can't find anything that's more stressful than that.
Well, consider your mom dying while you're in the middle of chemotherapy and then going through a very high profile, very contentious divorce.
Yeah. So
on top of all of that in a very short period of time. I can assure you, like for me, the divorce was more stressful than the brain tumor.
Anything else is a
I'm being dead serious here. Yeah. No, I'm dead serious. The divorce was more stressful for me than the brain tumor was. So, I mean, everything what I'll also say is that when I give keynotes, a lot of people will say, well, I experienced this ... but it wasn't as stressful as what you went through. And what I tell people is sort of crisis, and when we go into that, it's all relative. The closest thing I have to what I experienced in 05 through 08, which is that period for me, is actually right now during the pandemic. I've caught myself with thinking very similarly, and I'm like, but it's nowhere near. It's like not a big deal. You haven't gotten COVID-19. You have a great business. You have great clients. I have a great family. Like, why am I reacting this way? So, I come back to people negate the psychology and the mindset around stuff so much, because when you go through the diagnosis, you're just in survival mode. Just literally get through day to day. You don't know what big thing is going to land on your head tomorrow. And frankly, we all have PTSD from it. All of us do. I still do. Left over from that time, because it was trauma after trauma after trauma that I was dealing with.
Yeah, I can relate to that. And also, when you overcome these obstacles, even things like birthdays, and just every year after you survive, you become more resilient, I find, or certain individuals do, at least. I feel much more resilient to stress and unpredictable circumstances like COVID. I feel like I can deal with that because I can put it into perspective of life as a whole and what that means.
Yeah, I think it's the whole concept of uncertainty is where I have to keep myself in check, because that's what that period of time represented for me, was so much uncertainty and what COVID represents. And I catch myself because, they say you're the average of the 5 people you're around the most. And so like when I have like two of my team members yesterday couldn't run the team meeting because they were having a bad day. And I can't let that, for the same reason that I have to be careful when I jump into this brain tumor community so I can jump back out. Like, you know, like how do we operate at this level but maintain that energy and focus on what's important to us and what motivates us to, you know, make differences in people's lives and whatever that looks like. So energy is so critical, emotional and physical, to be able to do that.
The thing I find about the OurBrainBank initiative is it's a very positive
Absolutely
movement, and there's a lot of positive energy around that. If you go into these brain cancer groups or these forums online, there can be a lot of negativity and negative stories in there rather than focusing on all this positivity and hopes for the future. What do you see that excites you in terms of emerging therapies and treatments? Is there anything you're particularly excited about?
You know, I'm supposed to be, Andrew. Like, I'm supposed to have all these thought patterns on all these different therapies, but I just, it hasn't been relevant to me personally. So I'll very peripherally read, like especially on some of the genetic stuff, but I haven't done deep dives because I'm back to kind of stay in your lane, maintain my relationship with Duke, you know, try to be a leader, try to set a good example. And what I've done again in the space to give back is to talk with several of these families each month that get referred to me by a friend of a friend of a friend kind of thing. So I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other because I just don't know.
What do you typically say to these families? Are you signposting them to OurBrainBank and other organizations? And on that note, are there other organizations that you would like to highlight?
No, I think OurBrainBank, I send them to Al Macella's website, which is virtualtrials.com. And usually I tell them about the bigger centers in the US. And I'm like, you need to get on the phone, get extra slides, you know, get a post-op MRI, make sure you get the disc or a USB or whatever, and, you know, either call Duke, call UMass, call MD Anderson, call UCSF, talk to somebody so you can get another opinion.
And on a final note, this is quite controversial maybe, but not necessarily, because it's quite political. Joe Biden's son had a glioblastoma, I think it was. Yeah, he certainly had a malignant brain tumor and sadly passed away. Joe Biden himself had this big statement of a cancer moonshot. What would you call it? Like a dream, let's say. Do you feel like in terms of a future, do you think that politically there could be any influence on the direction we're heading, keeping in mind this change of the climate, the current climate?
Okay, so what you're trying to ask me, listen, I'm voting for Joe Biden. You don't have to worry about that. I'm not a Boris fan, not a DJT fan, so we can get that out of the way. So, and I read Jessica's op-ed. She had sent it to me for the New York Times. So I am hopeful. I'm hopeful he wins. I'm hopeful that if he wins, that more money goes to the NIH. I'm hopeful that more research goes here. I'm hopeful in all of these things. But like you said, there's so many politics and so many other things that are wrapped up in it, which it just saddens me. But that's unfortunately how politics work. And again, I don't know what else to tell you other than I'm hopeful politically that he wins, and I'm hopeful that more research dollars goes here. But I'm hopeful, but I'm not optimistic. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm trying to balance it, because when you look at least the American Cancer Society, they look at demographics of cases. And, you know, if you compare it to like lung cancer and breast cancer, we're such a small part, so we don't get the same kind of research funding. It's been through these private donors, through these brain tumor centers, that are really the ones directly funding the research, that aren't having to deal with some of the red tape in terms of government.
Yeah, I asked that question because it does have such the politics has such an influence on where the funding goes.
Yeah, no, you're right. But again, I mean, we could sit here and debate this again till the cows come home. But if some of these private donors are funding these cancer centers, that allows these brain tumor centers to do even more research. Where if it goes through the government, which is great, but at least this is in the U.S., you've still got to deal with all the red tape and getting buy-in and this, that, and the other. Where I think we'll get there faster if we can get more people that have had family members, throw some money at some of these big cancer centers, like what Robert Tisch did. I mean, with what that funds is absolutely spectacular. But of course, I want money to go through the government. It's just going to be slower moving to get approval because you have to have 10 bazillion people sign off on it.
Yeah. But we're hopeful for the future, whatever the outcome,
Absolutely.
I suppose. And it's always good to be hopeful. So I think we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your time and having these important conversations and sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for doing this, Andrew, and thanks for your advocacy to this cause. It's super important, and I'll be watching for this, and I'm kind of excited to see what big things you'll be doing.
Thank you, and I will keep you updated.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you.
Have a wonderful rest of the day.